Hey guys, so what's going on in the world right now? Obviously, a lot of people are asking questions and predicting, is this the end of the world? Is this when Jesus is going to return? There's lots of questions that are going on right now. So, gonna go on a bit of a journey for a little bit about this idea of, is what's happening right now linked to the Bible? And let's just get a little bit of understanding of what the Bible says about end times and obviously the prophecies that were throughout the Bible about what would have to happen in the last days. So, four main things here that talk about the prophecies of the end times that have to happen. So, first of all, the gospel has to be preached to the whole world, so that every nation will hear the good news of Jesus throughout the whole world. And obviously, the development of the internet meant that was possible. um, Daniel talks about that in the end times, that many will rush here and there, and knowledge will increase. And Bible scholars say that this is all about an increase in technology in the last days. And I know that we've seen that a lot recently in the last few years with all the technological advancements. Luke talks about there'll be great earthquakes and famines and great plagues in the lands, and obviously links this idea that in the last days there'll be more natural disasters. And then the last one here in Matthew, you'll hear of wars and rumors of wars, and obviously that's probably could be applied through a lot of history really. But they do link it to the idea of like the final war between countries and coming against Israel. So these prophecies are very key to what happens in the last days. Another prophecy that and has to take place is the idea of the Jewish temple has to be rebuilt. Now, the biggest obstacle to this throughout history has been the idea that actually where the Temple Mount is, the Dome of the Rock sat on the top of the Temple Mount, and so for the Jewish temple to be built, because they believe the Jewish temple being rebuilt will be um, bringing in the Messiah, because they don't believe Jesus is the Messiah. Um, and so they wouldn't be able to build it because the Dome of Rock is there, and so it would cause World War III if they built their temple, because they'd have to knock down the Dome of the Rock. So one big key thing that I've discovered in sort of my research recently is that archaeologists in the last 2 years have actually discovered that they don't think the site of the temple was actually on the Temple Mount. They think it was in the city of David, which was south of the Temple Mount, where there's the Gihon Spring, which is some fresh water, which would be really necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple. So this third temple that has to be rebuilt, it's only Jewish tradition that's standing in the way of the temple being rebuilt. And the temple is really key to the events of the end times, because the temple being rebuilt means that actually the Antichrist, who's a key player in the end times, will form a peace agreement, a covenant with Israel that will last 7 years. And the fact that they could rebuild the temple could lead to that peace agreement between them, and so would lead to the last 7 years before the return of Jesus to earth. So the temple is really key. So obviously for us as Christians, that's something to really watch and keep an eye on, and that will help us understand that we're living in the end times. So let's have a look at the key players that are meant to take place in the last days of this planet. So the major players are the Antichrist and the false prophet. So prophecies in the Bible tell us the Antichrist will most likely come from the old Roman Empire. So there's 46 countries there, so that gives us a lot of options where this leader could rise from. However, I've been studying this recently, and I'm just thinking about this idea of the Antichrist, and obviously everyone through history has said that, and they've interpreted this as being a one leader throughout history. So the verse in Revelation we're going to have a look at is Revelation 13. And I'm going to pull out a few parts of this and try and explain it to you. So the beast coming out of the sea, so that's interpreted as basically the Antichrist will rise during a time of world crisis. It will have 10 horns with crowns on. Most biblical scholars believe that is the 10 kingdoms of Europe that have been united. But we know that Europe's actually made of 27 countries. So I'm starting to think that maybe this 10 horns with 10 crowns could be 10 governments of Europe of the old Roman Empire. It could be 10 countries of Europe of the old Roman Empire that maybe had kings or queens historically throughout history. So maybe that's another interpretation that could be looked at. The second part is that it talks about 7 heads, and it says the 7 heads are blasphemous names on. So these 7 heads don't have crowns on, and so these 7 heads could be 7 nations that historically maybe then are more atheist in nature and blasphemous to God in the Bible and have come against God in the Bible. So maybe that could be a different, if we took it literally, let's think of it that way, that actually literally 10 horns, 10 governments from Europe, 7 heads, 7 blasphemous countries that all link up together to join one global government that controls the world in the end times. Then the next part of the verse talks about that the characteristics of the Antichrist. So talks about the beast resembled a lion, had feet like a bear, and a mouth like beast resembled a leopard, had feet like a bear, and a mouth like a lion. And what the few interpretations of this are either that it has characteristics of what was the Alexander the Great's empire, the Persian Empire, or the Babylonian Empire, or that this is going to be that the Antichrist is the fourth beast. So all of those have gone before, and this is going to be the next great power. However, again, we could take that prophecy literally, and we could say, okay, what 4 beasts are resembled by those? What countries are resembled by those beasts? So in modern days, what are the animals that are associated with countries? So Russia is associated with the bear, the leopard is associated with North Korea, and the lion is associated with Iran. So could it mean that those countries are involved in this sort of collaboration of 17 governments that make up the Antichrist in the end times? So how does this apply now? Well, a couple of things that need to happen. So it says one of the heads of the beast seems to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. So we can interpret that right now because the world is currently looking at China and thinking, wow, how has China recovered so quickly from Corona? How have has the stock markets recovered? Why didn't it spread through China as much as it has through other nations? And I know there's lots of conspiracies about, China being behind it and stuff like that. But what if this is, linked to biblical prophecy? What if this whole idea of them appearing to have a fatal wound, but then that being healed, is actually because they're one of the 17 nations that do form the final Antichrist government? Right, then the second player that comes into play in the last days is this one of the false prophet. So the false prophet is basically predicted to support the rise of the Antichrist, makes the whole earth worship the Antichrist, and deceives the world through the use of signs. It says even causing fire to come from heaven. So the false prophet has a real key role in the end times, and it can be assumed that these two can rise before the temple is built. Their reign will be for the 7 years, but the actual rise to power could be before the temple is actually built. So a couple of things we know about the false prophet: he has horns like a lamb. So Bible scholars say that maybe this means he comes from Jewish heritage. He's going to be using magic or sorcery to deceive the nations. So we do know a little bit more about the false prophet. We know that the false prophet resembles Babylon of old, and if we talked about the idea of like being dressed in purple and scarlet, glittering with gold, precious stones and pearls, this idea that could be that the false prophet has a sort of has a richness, it is wealthy, or there is another interpretation that says maybe it appears to do good for the good of the world, but actually the intentions behind it are corrupt. So does anyone spring to mind? Jewish background, rich, appearing to do good across the world right now, but actually intentions behind it possibly could be corrupt. So what else do we know? So we know obviously sorcery and magic have a big part to play in the false prophets supporting of the Antichrist. So we know throughout history that the leaders all the way through the world were always supported by wise men that predicted the future and looked at the stars and tried to interpret what was going to happen and gave advice to different pharaohs and kings and emperors all the way through history. So we're going to assume that obviously the false prophet is going to be very, very similar. Is going to be someone that's going to be advising, these people of power, and is going to be predicting the future, and using signs and wonders to do so. So I looked at the idea of sorcery and magic. Obviously, it sounds very much like witchcraft and wizardry, doesn't it? Um, but I looked at the original Greek for the word sorcery and magic, and the original Greek actually is the word pharmakia, which actually is a definition is the use of medicine. So let's try and put this into context in modern times then. So we can conclude the false prophet will be rich, properly have a Jewish heritage, look as though they're doing good, and will use medicine to deceive the nations. I don't know about you guys, but this gives me some ideas of things that are going on around the internet currently and people that are doing things around the world and appearing to do really good things, but just not adding up. Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates personally trying to fix the corona testing problem. This guy Bill Gates just keeps cropping up. He predicted this idea in this scenario 5 years ago. He was supporting of the predictive scenario that was put forward by the Rockefeller Foundation, who work on vaccines and public health. He is funding all this research into ID vaccinations across the world. And even Science and Nature, the journal, are saying that digital technology and social media offer an opportunity. The technology sector is on a mission to equip everyone on the planet with a digital and online presence. The innovations that will help to achieve that goal are exactly those that could aid the global public health community in vaccinating every child. So it does lend itself, what's going on right now, to this idea of the false prophet. Now, I'm not suggesting that they are, but I am suggesting that it does link up, and you can, and you'll read this for yourself in the Bible when you look at Revelation 13, the description of the false prophet, and look at this idea of, the fact that the word sorcery and the word magic means pharmacy, means drugs, means medicine. So in my next quick video I'm going to do, I'm going to just talk about something that the false prophet and the Antichrist bring into existence in the end times, that Christians obviously have to be aware of if they are living in those times.